So that's why we all mostly love the Zapatistas, who do not identify as necessarily an ism or an anarchism. The Zapatistas started out in this tiny little micro level, talking to each other in the jungles, in the dark, in the shadows, hidden away, like we do in our little projects with nobody seeing us. And they struggled, and I've heard all sorts, not to romanticize the Zapatistas, they probably have really horrendous collective meetings from what I've heard. A lot of really hard, difficult decisions. And they started really tiny and did that for 10 years, and how it meant to talk to each other, and pushed out on the world scene, and then they pushed towns to do it, and they pushed spaces to do it. And they've gotten a really largely articulated, pretty successful version of it, even with a lot of problems. And they're prefiguring an autonomous region now. And that's pretty remarkable. But it started with them prefiguring how the hell do we even talk to each other. And they did it intentionally because they want to change the world, and they want it to expand past that region. So prefiguration is like dropping a stone in and hope, and we all drop stones in water, and we hope enough of them keep merging over, and suddenly we've made a lovely new lake. But we suddenly pushed out, that's when you do prefiguration. That's actually intention, meant to be intention. And actually, it's great when the city council comes and tries to shut down your neighborhood assembly in a way, because then you're creating trouble, and that's good. You're actually contesting power, and you're actually doing something different. So the distinction for me, again, is that prefiguration isn't something that's just great for us, and that we can keep doing, but is actually in contestation with capitalism or racism or homophobia or other things like that.
The way you just described the categories that you can think about prefigurative, like political, social, personal, all that, I never thought about doing it that way. And I do like the thought experiment idea a lot, but I tend to think of it more in terms of like food, health, housing, and to have thought experiments of how would I like the food to happen or the health to happen or whatever. And I think that one thing you said earlier about pushing the edge, and you gave the example of the guerrilla gardening and now the White House vegetable garden. I sort of heard you saying that once you've pushed the edge and it's been taken over by the mainstream, then you have to move on and find another edge to push. I think that there's another alternative, which is the edge is always very possible, and to stay with the edge and to keep making the edge, taking all the opportunities that the edge may present. And so when I'm thinking prefigurative on the food front, especially right now, I think it's useful to prefigure it. And this word drives me nuts. I mean, this imagining the future. Right now, because people are so needy. I mean, we need food and health and shelter and education, all these things. To imagine different ways for them to be is a good time. And so food, for example, even with the White House taking up vegetable gardening, this is yet another example, because people everywhere are taking up growing food for themselves. And so this is an opportunity to take that edge and recognize how fertile it could be. And anarchists taking, for example, decision making. How do you make decisions in our community gardens, and trying to make them more consensual and introducing all these other dimensions of interpersonal relations as we grow our food. And even imagining that those boundaries of what's political, what's economic, what's personal are no longer necessary. So you say you're interested in the political, but somehow you've pulled the political out of the garden.
Right.
And so instead, I'm not saying instead, but another way of doing it is to think about the actual human needs and to try to bring all of those other things into the imagining of how it could be different.
Right. Yeah. Great. It's true. I mean, that's what's so hard. I think that's what's so hard, is that it's really hard to say everything has to change. And then here we are as individuals, and if one person's passionate about food, I mean, I've done a lot of food projects too, so I completely get what you're saying, where the point is for me to democratize neighborhood space and food politics and how the food gets produced, and it's all about all those things together. So I don't know, the way I describe this maybe not a good way to talk about it. How do we talk, what's even the language to talk about what things look like that try to be multidimensional in everything they do? And that's really tricky. So that's, I guess, what I meant pushing the edge, is like, it's great if everybody starts guerrilla gardening in a sense on public property, but to me it's interesting to start contesting commodification of property and food, how food gets made and distributed, who has access to it, how its decisions are made around it, when it can happen, where it can happen. And that's what I sort of find. I mean, I wasn't saying you should stop doing food. I was sort of saying, okay, how do we keep saying it doesn't suddenly become like, oh great, it's wonderful, it's now we're all just making food, and capitalism, it makes almost sometimes capitalism look better. So I've been really perplexed by anarchists were at the cutting edge of a radical ecology that was anti-capitalist like 15 or 20 years ago, and half the things that anarchists were calling for 25 years ago now are so commonplace, so like small scale, solar energy, reducing, wind power all on this micro level. Everybody's doing it now and talking about how it's going to revitalize capitalism. Should we stop doing windmill small scale and stop doing, all these? No. But the point is, what would a radical ecology look like that was actually pushing capitalism again? I don't know the answer. I'd love for some people to be doing work around that in terms of a practice. What is it that we would do that would look different from now? Everybody thinks what the things that anarchists used to do as prefigurative practices now can make money and make the market work better. And that's disturbing to me. Doesn't mean those practices are wrong. There's something we need to do differently about that. Maybe it's the dimension you just said, where maybe the point is it's not directly democratic. We need to push that side of it, or etc. Whatever it is. So anyway, anyone want to throw out other examples? Maybe you've spoken, I've spoken too much. So why don't we have people that haven't spoken as much as either of us?
You bring to mind two different ideas that I've heard of and been exposed to.
Maybe you should speak up a little louder. I'm not
Okay.
sure.
One of them is a concept of next step, which was actually developed in Sweden, but it's been used here a lot as a group decision-making and execution process, whereby a group will get together and blue sky the ideas that they want their community or environment or whatever to espouse. And then they just map out a process by step how they're going to get there. And it's it's engineering project management broken unfortunately, but it does accomplish what you're describing. It does get the group decision making all involved, and it does get there. It doesn't. The expectation is not set that you're going to get there in one step and just all of a sudden. The other thing it brings to mind is Pace University does a training called their Community Leadership Program, whereby they teach municipal government people how to involve the entire community in large parcel development, typically a large parcel in a rural area especially. The owner is going to want to do something that is way outside the zoning rules. And the zoning rules are typically not something that the community likes to begin with. But what they teach is how to get the entire community to work together before the project is defined, so that they can take everybody's objections and concerns about the property and integrate those all into this one process of coming up with a vision of what the property is going to look like when it's developed. It saves the developer a lot of time and money, not going through a number of iterations on the process. Plus, it saves the community a lot of grief, ending up with something that's acceptable to all of them.
I would have to say that's an interesting category of things that people do that look anarchistic, that actually are missing elements. It's actually oftentimes in order to help a developer make it easier for the government, because then they can say, look, we had everyone participating, so it must be, but we've already framed it. But I think the prefigurative practice comes in when anarchists get engaged in projects like that and actually come in and say, wait a minute, why do you guys still get the power to decide? Wait a minute, why does developers still get to make money off this land? So I actually would say the prefigurative practice in that is it's kind of interesting. It's almost like taking the shell of it, but then we need to go as one prefigurative practice into those things and push it out, and which is one legitimate form of prefigurative practice that anarchists do really well, I think, is go into those things that seemingly are participatory and actually force them to try to make them, which usually doesn't work and usually just destroys them in a good way, which is actually a good prefigurative practice, and often new things come out of that. So, and sorry, I missed you two both had your hands up.
Can people say their names when?
Oh right, sorry. Maybe say your name beforehand. Sorry.
People who spoke already. Because it's such a shame, we come together to organize. We sit, then we go like ghost ships in the night. We might see each other on the subway and look and say, now who the fuck is
But then if you see somebody, then just walk up. I forget everyone's name anyway. Just walk up and say, I know I've seen you before. What's your name? I never remember anyone's name. So we should still introduce ourselves later.